Welcome to our 7th ever Art Slides lecture and our first lecture for Unit 3. Today's subject is Hellenistic Art. You should recognize this word as I have been mentioning it for several weeks now. If you'll recall, Greece is sometimes referred to as Hellas. When we say Hellenic, we are referring to the period before the unification of Greece. Recall that Greece for several centuries was composed of independent city-states. It is not unified until Philip of Macedon, father of Alexander the Great, conquers the area. The Hellenistic period lasts from the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BCE until Mark Antony and Cleopatra are defeated by Octavian in 31 BCE. So when you think of the Hellenistic period, remember that this is sort of the heyday of unified Greece. Our first slide is the remarkably creepy head of Alexander. Just look at that wonky nose and blank stare. Alexander is primarily responsible for the Hellenization of virtually the entire Middle East. In his short life, he died when he was only 32, he created the largest empire known to the world at that time. As we will see in this unit, his empire did not pass on to a single successor, but was broken up under multiple rulers. The sculpture here is an excellent example of Hellenistic royal portraiture. As the ruler of Greece, Alexander needed to establish an official royal image. This was done by the artist Lysippos. The sculpture by Lysippos is now lost, but this one, found at Pergamon, is made in the same style. Notice the swept back hair, the furrowed brow, the dreamy eyes, I say that with some heavy air quotes, and parted lips. These were characteristic features of Alexander's portraits and came to be commonly used in many future Hellenistic portraits. Our next piece is a little odd for this lecture, but it's here for a good reason. This is a Roman mosaic found in Pompeii. Now, you might be wondering why we would look at a Roman mosaic in a lecture on Hellenistic art, and you'd be wise to do so. But this piece is actually a copy of an older Hellenistic fresco. A theme that we will see time and time again in this unit is that the Romans really liked the Greeks and spent a lot of time copying them. Mosaics such as this were installed on floors, typically in an area of the house used for greeting guests. This particular copy depicts Alexander at the Battle of Issos. He is the only visible figure riding a horse on the left side of the image. You can tell that it is him by the swept back hair, as we saw in the last image. Notice the use of shadows and highlights to create a sense of depth, as well as the angling of spears and bodies so as to give the impression that the Greek army is plowing into and defeating the Persian army. The fact that this image of a Greek leader was copied into the house of a Roman citizen displays the depth of reverence that the Romans held not just for the Greeks, but for Alexander in particular. His military prowess would be idealized by Romans for centuries. Our next piece is a full-size statue of the orator Demosthenes. As with many pieces from this period, this is a copy of the now lost original. This statue is an excellent example of the Hellenistic interest in character studies. In the classical period, we primarily see sculpture as an attempt to understand the ideal human form. Hellenistic art, however, is more concerned with being realistic and telling a particular story. Demosthenes led a very difficult life. While he was a well-known orator who fought for Athenian democracy, he also fought his own personal battles of poverty and a serious stutter. When the Macedonians conquered Athens, he vehemently opposed their rule. He was eventually tried under charges of corruption and exiled to the island of Poros. Once there, he drank poison so that he would not have to submit to Macedonian rule. This statue is one of a series that depicted Athenian heroes who opposed the Macedonians. Looking at it, you can get a sense of Demosthenes as a character. He is old, thin, and careworn. His clothing is simple and unpretentious. His brow is furrowed with thought and concern. His hands seem to clench almost into fists. We can see in him great tension. He has led a life of great difficulty and has found wisdom in it. In addition to capturing characters, Hellenistic art also displays a strong command of form and motion in space. This next slide shows a statue known as Winged Victory or Winged Nike. You may remember that Nike is another name for Athena. Athena, as I'm sure you recall from the Odyssey, was believed to follow men into battle and support their efforts. We see this most clearly in the final fight between Odysseus and Telemachus against the suitors. Athena strengthens the two protagonists and fights alongside them. This statue is commemorative of a naval victory attributed to Athena. She is seen here alighting on the deck of a ship. I've always loved this statue for its intense sense of motion. It is currently in the Louvre, and I hope to make it there to see it someday. Looking at this piece, it is clear to us that she is fighting against the elements. Her torso leans forward with the momentum of flight, while her wings are spread up and back to halt her motion. Her skirt swirls around her legs and flutters behind her. This next slide depicts, although not very clearly, the exaggeration of emotion, energetic movement, and pathos common to Hellenistic sculpture. When the Gauls, a group that we will learn about later, invaded Pergamon, King Attalus I defeated them and established Pergamon as a major political force. Later on, this monumental altar to Zeus was erected in recognition of this victory. It has been reconstructed here in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. Originally, it was built partly as a display of power in the face of growing threats to Greek supremacy. There are two friezes along the lower section of the structure that depict the Olympians fighting the Titans. Some of the scenes are similar to those that we see on the Parthenon, but here they have added a sense of frenzy and melodrama and exaggerated emotion, all of which are characteristic of Hellenistic art. Okay, next on the list is the Venus de Milo, or Aphrodite of Melos. Moving forward, we will begin to see multiple names for the same gods or goddesses. Roman fascination with the Greeks led them to syncretize their pantheon of gods with that of the Greeks. Thus, each Greek god has a Roman equivalent. In this case, the Greek goddess Aphrodite came to be known as Venus in the Roman Empire. This statue is referred to by both its Greek and Roman conventions because, as we have seen several times today, it is a Roman copy of a Hellenistic original. This statue is done in a style known as classical revival. It displays a revival of features that from the Greek classical period. If you recall, Praxiteles was a Greek sculptor who introduced more sensual or risque figures into the Greek canon. This image of Aphrodite does away with some of the hyper-realistic elements of Hellenistic art in favor of softer, idealized images of the classical period. Notice the pronounced S shape that we first noted in Praxiteles' statue of Aphrodite at Knidos. This next piece is known simply as Boxer. The context or use for this statue is unknown, but it remains an important example of the harsh and sometimes exaggerated reality of Hellenistic art. The statue depicts a seated boxer, awkwardly twisting his head to look over his shoulder. His hands are wrapped in rough pieces of leather commonly used by Greek boxers. His face is covered in scars, and his nose and teeth appear to be broken. He even has cauliflower ears. While he is muscular, his rib cage is beginning to show, perhaps indicating age. While this figure is no less striking, it is a far cry from the perfectly postured and proportioned statues of the classical period. Lastly, we have yet another Roman copy of a Hellenistic statue. This one is called Laocoon and His Two Sons. It depicts the mythical tale from the Greek epic cycle of the Trojan War. It is believed that Sophocles once wrote a play about Laocoon that is now lost. It is generally agreed upon that his character was a priest, but different accounts attribute him to different gods. Stories also vary on why he was killed. Some say that he and his sons attempted to reveal the ruse of the Trojan horse and were killed as a result, and others say that he had sex with his wife in the temple of Poseidon and was killed as punishment. Who's to say? Either way, he is shown here with his sons fighting two serpents. This statue was found buried in Italy in 1506 and was put on display at the Vatican, where it remains today. I was able to view a copy of this statue in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford a few years ago. I've always liked this one for several reasons. One being that it's just fun to say Laocoon. You should try it sometime. Another is that, similar to the Winged Victory, this statue has a distinct sense of motion. We can feel the snake winding around the figures while they try to free themselves from it. It is also an excellent example of the expression of human agony. When it was found in 1506, it became a source of inspiration for a lot of religious art that we will study later on in your humanities sequence. That's all that we have for today. Once again, play your own outro music because I'm not going to play it for you.